The morning Clara Winslow learned she would never bear children. The doctor's words fell upon her like stones thrown into still water, each one sending ripples through her entire being. Dr. Harrington, a man whose whiskers had grown white from delivering too much bad news, couldn't meet her eyes as he packed his leather bag. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Winslow. There's nothing more to be done." Her husband, Samuel, stood by the window, his back rigid as fence posts, hands clasped behind him. The silence that followed stretched taut as barbed wire between them. 2 years of marriage, 2 years of monthly disappointments, had led to this moment in their modest frame house on Elm Street. "You may leave now, Doctor," Samuel said without turning around. His voice carried the same flat tone he used when discussing failed crops or diseased cattle. That night, Clara lay beside her husband in their marriage bed, the space between them feeling wider than the Rio Grande. She could hear him breathing, knew he was awake, but neither spoke. The moonlight filtered through muslin curtains, casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the bedroom wall. By morning, Samuel had made his decision. He sat at the breakfast table, his coffee growing cold, while Clara set down a plate of biscuits and gravy with trembling hands. "I'll speak to Judge Morrison about an annulment," he said, still not looking at her. "A man needs sons to carry on his name. You understand?" Clara's fingers tightened on the edge of the table until her knuckles went white. "We could adopt—" "No." The word cracked like a whip. "I need my own blood, my own legacy." Within a month, the papers were signed. Samuel kept the house, the small fortune her father had left her. Everything except her mother's silver brush and mirror set and the clothes on her back. The law, like everything else in the year 1885, favored the man who could produce heirs. The good women of Cedar Falls, Texas, watched from behind their curtains as Clara walked down Main Street with her single carpet bag. Their whispers followed her like tumbleweeds in the wind. "Barren," they said. "Cursed," they murmured. What man would want her now? Mrs. Abigail Morrison, the judge's wife and leader of the Methodist Women's Society, stopped Clara outside the general store. Her face wore the expression of someone offering charity to a leper. "My dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "perhaps you should consider moving somewhere more suitable, a fresh start, away from all this unpleasantness." Clara met her gaze steadily. "Perhaps I should." That evening, Clara sat in the boarding house room she'd rented with her last few dollars, composing a letter by candlelight. Her neat script flowed across the paper. "Educated woman seeks position as housekeeper. Experienced in all domestic arts. Willing to relocate. No family obligations." She posted advertisements in newspapers as far as San Antonio and El Paso. For weeks, nothing came. She took in mending, washed clothes for pennies, and ignored the pitying looks of her former friends. Then, just as her money was running out, a response arrived. Mrs. C. Winslow. The letter read in spidery handwriting. "The Garrison family of Marfa requires a housekeeper immediately. Remote location. Must be willing to endure isolation. Payment adequate. Reply at once if interested." Marfa. Clara had heard of it. A frontier town near the Mexican border, surrounded by nothing but desert and mountains. It might as well have been the moon. Perfect. She sold her mother's silver set to buy passage on the stagecoach, keeping only the small hand mirror as a remembrance. The pawnbroker, Mr. Goldman, counted out the bills slowly, his eyes soft with something that might have been kindness. "You sure about this, Mrs. Winslow? Frontier's no place for a woman alone." "Oh, I'm sure about nothing anymore, Mr. Goldman, but staying here will kill me sure as a bullet." The stagecoach left at dawn 3 days later. Clara sat wedged between a traveling preacher who smelled of whiskey and righteousness, and a salesman whose wandering hands she had to slap away twice before he got the message. The other passengers included a Mexican family heading home, and 2 cowboys who spent the entire journey spitting tobacco juice out the window. As Cedar Falls disappeared behind them, Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Each mile took her further from the woman she'd been. Samuel's wife, the barren woman, the object of pity and scorn. She didn't know who she would become, but anything seemed better than who she'd been forced to be. The journey to Marfa was supposed to take 5 days. On the 3rd day, at a way station near Fort Stockton, the stagecoach driver announced they'd be delayed. "Apache trouble up ahead," he said, stroking his gray beard. "We'll wait here for an army escort." But Clara couldn't wait. The walls of the station felt too much like the walls of her old life closing in, while the others slept. She made a decision that would later seem like madness. She found the station master and negotiated. "I'll buy that old mare you've got out back," she said, "and I'll need directions to Marfa that avoid the main road." "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's pure foolishness. A woman alone." "I've been called worse than foolish," Clara interrupted. "Name your price." He sold her the mare, an aging paint horse named Buttermilk, along with a worn saddle, 2 canteens, hardtack, and jerky. He sketched a rough map on brown paper, warning her about every danger he could think of. "Follow the mountains," he said. "Stay off the ridge lines where you can be seen. There's supposed to be an old trail through Devil's Canyon that'll cut 2 days off your journey, but I ain't never seen it myself." Clara left before dawn, while the stars still commanded the sky. She'd ridden as a girl on her father's farm, but never like this. Never alone, never through country that could kill her as easy as welcome her. The first day passed in a blur of red rock and scrub brush. She rationed her water carefully, ate sparingly, and spoke to Buttermilk to keep the overwhelming silence at bay. The paint horse proved steady and sure-footed, picking her way through the rough terrain with the patience of her years. On the 2nd day, Clara found what she thought was the trail through Devil's Canyon. The narrow path wound between towering walls of stone that blocked out all but a ribbon of sky above. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in the shadow of the canyon walls, and Clara pulled her shawl tighter. That's when everything went wrong. Buttermilk stumbled on loose shale, crying out as her leg twisted beneath her. Clara barely managed to jump clear before the horse went down. The mare struggled to rise, but her right foreleg wouldn't bear weight. "No, no, no," Clara whispered, running her hands over the injured leg. It wasn't broken, thank God, but badly sprained. Buttermilk wouldn't be carrying anyone anywhere for weeks. Clara looked around the canyon, really looked, and realized she had no idea where she was. The trail had petered out into a dozen different paths between the rocks. Her water was down to half a canteen. The sun was already past its zenith, and shadows were beginning to lengthen. She was going to die out here. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt oddly calm. At least it would be on her own terms, not as Samuel's discarded wife or Cedar Falls' object of pity. Clara made Buttermilk as comfortable as possible in the shade of an overhang, then climbed to higher ground to get her bearings. What she saw made her heart sink. Endless miles of canyon and mesa stretching in every direction, with no sign of human habitation. The sun was touching the western peaks when she heard the horses. 2 riders appeared on the ridge above her, silhouetted against the dying light like something out of a dime novel. They paused for a moment, then began picking their way down toward her with the easy grace of men born to the saddle. Clara's hand went to the derringer in her skirt pocket, a going-away gift from Mr. Goldman. She didn't know how to use it, but maybe she wouldn't have to. As they drew closer, she could make out details. 2 men, alike as mirror images, the same lean build, the same dark hair falling past their collars, the same way of sitting their horses like they were part of the animals themselves. Brothers, she realized. Twins. They stopped 20 feet away, respectful of the distance a frightened woman might need. The one on the left, riding a black gelding, touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft as summer rain. "Looks like you could use some help." Clara's eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar surroundings. Instead of hard rock beneath her, she lay on something soft, a real bed with clean sheets that smelled of lye soap and sage. Wooden beams crossed overhead, and somewhere nearby, a fire crackled in a hearth. She tried to sit up, but the room spun like a child's toy. "Easy there," A man's voice, gentle as morning mist. One of the twins sat in a chair beside the bed, a bowl of water and cloth in his hands. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly, sharp cheekbones softened by concerned brown eyes, a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. "You've been out for near 2 days. Heat got you pretty good." "My horse," Clara whispered, her throat dry as parchment. "She's in the barn, resting that leg. My brother's got away with horses. She'll be right as rain in a few weeks." He dipped the cloth in water and held it out to her. "I'm Eli McCall. That's my brother Ezra you can hear banging around in the kitchen." Clara took the cloth gratefully, pressing it to her burning face. Through the open door, she could indeed hear someone moving about. The clatter of pans and scrape of chairs. The domesticity of it felt strange after her ordeal. "Where am I?" "Our place. About 15 miles northwest of where we found you. Not many folks know about it, which is how we like it." Eli poured water from a pitcher into a glass. Small sips now. The water tasted of minerals and earth, but Clara had never tasted anything so sweet. As she drank, she studied Eli from beneath lowered lashes. He moved with quiet efficiency, like a man used to tending the sick. There was something gentle about him that seemed at odds with the harsh land outside. "I need to get to Marfa," she said when she could speak again. "The Garrison family is expecting me." Eli's brow furrowed. "Ma'am, I hate to tell you this, but there ain't no Garrison family in Marfa. Hasn't been for 5 years now. They lost their ranch in a drought and headed back east." The glass nearly slipped from Clara's numb fingers. No position, no job, no plan. She was worse than lost. She was nobody going nowhere. "I see," she managed, though she saw nothing but darkness closing in. "You can stay here until you figure things out," Eli said quickly. "We've got the room, and Lord knows this place could use a woman's touch, if you're willing to help out some. We'd call it even." Before Clara could respond, the other twin appeared in the doorway. Where Eli was gentle water, Ezra was hard stone. Same face, same build, but his eyes held shadows that made Clara want to look away. He carried a tray with a bowl of something that steamed. "Brought you some broth," he said curtly, setting the tray on the bedside table with more force than necessary. "Nothing fancy." "Thank you," Clara said, but he was already turning away. "Don't mind him," Eli said softly after his brother had gone. "Ezra's not much for strangers, or talking, or people in general, come to think of it." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "And you?" "Oh, I like people fine. Just don't see many of them out here." He stood, suddenly seeming awkward. "I'll let you eat. Holler if you need anything." Over the next days, Clara learned the rhythms of the McCall household. The brothers had built their cabin in a valley hidden by ridges of red rock, where a spring fed a small creek that ran year-round. They ran cattle and horses, trapped in winter, and lived like hermits who'd forgotten they were supposed to be lonely. Eli was the early riser, up before dawn to tend the stock. He'd leave coffee warming on the stove and biscuits wrapped in cloth. Ezra worked the farther pastures, often gone from sunup to sundown, returning covered in dust and silence. They moved around each other like dancers who knew their steps by heart but had forgotten the music. As soon as Clara could stand without the world tilting, she set about earning her keep. The cabin was sturdy but neglected in the way of places without women. Dust gathered in corners, windows went unwashed, and the kitchen bore evidence of 2 men who viewed cooking as a necessary evil. She started small, washing dishes, sweeping floors, mending the pile of torn clothes she found stuffed in a corner. Neither brother commented, but she noticed Eli's slight smile when he found his favorite shirt repaired, saw how Ezra paused when he walked into the cleaned kitchen. "Storm's coming," Ezra announced one evening, speaking more words than he had all week. "Could be a bad one." Clara had noticed the signs herself, the way the horses bunched together in the corral, how the air felt heavy and electric. In Texas, storms could mean anything from a brief downpour to deadly flash floods. "I'll help bring in the stock," she offered. Ezra's sharp gaze cut to her. You ever work cattle in weather? I was raised on a farm. I can ride and rope well enough. Something shifted in his expression. Too quick to read. Fine. Take the paint mare. Her legs healed enough for light work. Eli, you get the south pasture. I'll take the canyon. They worked through the afternoon as the sky darkened from blue to bruised purple. Clara hadn't been on horseback in months, but her body remembered. She helped drive a dozen steers back to the holding pens near the barn, her shouts mixing with the brothers' whistles and calls. The first fat drops of rain were falling when they finished. Lightning flickered along the ridge, and thunder rolled down the valley like boulders. Good work, Eli said, surprising her as she unsaddled Buttermilk. His shirt was soaked through, clinging to the lean muscles of his back. Been a while since we got them all in so quick. Where's Ezra? Eli frowned, scanning the darkening landscape. Should have been back by now. They waited as the storm intensified, rain coming down in sheets that turned the yard to mud. Clara could see the worry deepening in Eli's eyes with each flash of lightning. I'm going after him, Eli said finally, reaching for his slicker. In this? Clara caught his arm. You can't see 10 feet out there. He's my brother. The simple statement carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. Before Clara could respond, a figure on horseback materialized from the rain like a ghost. Ezra, hat gone, hair plastered to his skull, leading a limping calf across his saddle. Fool animal got stuck in a wash, he said as Eli rushed to help. Couldn't leave it to drown. They got the calf into the barn, where it stood shivering and bawling for its mother. Clara found herself working alongside the brothers, rubbing the animal dry with old blankets while rain hammered the roof above. There now, Ezra murmured to the calf, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. You're all right. In that moment, soaked and muddy in the lamplight, Clara saw past his harsh exterior to something else, a capacity for tenderness carefully walled away. When he glanced up and caught her watching, his expression shuddered again. I'll heat some coffee, she said quickly, giving him space. The storm raged through the night. They sat around the kitchen table, exhausted but unable to sleep with nature's fury outside. Eli told stories of other storms, other years, his voice weaving a spell against the darkness. Even Ezra relaxed enough to add a comment here and there. Why here? Clara asked during a lull. Why so far from everything? The brothers exchanged a look she couldn't interpret. Sometimes, far from everything is exactly where a man needs to be, Eli said quietly. Clara understood. Hadn't she fled Cedar Falls for the same reason? In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Clara stood on the porch, breathing air so clear it hurt her lungs. The valley spread before her, red rock and green sage, with the creek running high and muddy. It's beautiful, she said as Eli joined her. Has its moments. He stood close enough that she could smell the soap on his skin, feel the warmth radiating from his body. Clara, can I ask you something? She nodded, not trusting her voice. What are you running from? The question should have felt invasive, but somehow it didn't, maybe because she could ask him the same thing. A life that was killing me by inches, she said honestly. A husband who saw me as worthless when I couldn't. She stopped, unable to voice her shame even here. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then, so gently she almost didn't feel it, his hand covered hers on the porch rail. Nothing worthless about you that I can see, he said. The touch lasted only seconds before boots stomped on the porch boards and Ezra appeared, carrying an armload of firewood. His dark gaze took in their proximity, the way Clara quickly pulled her hand back. Wood's getting low, he said flatly. I'll be cutting more today. He shouldered past them into the house, leaving Clara feeling like she'd been caught in something improper. But what? A moment of kindness, a touch of hands. That night, she heard the brothers arguing, their voices carrying through the thin walls though she couldn't make out the words. She pulled her pillow over her head, trying to shut out the sound and the growing certainty that her presence here was causing trouble between them. But where else could she go? And more troubling still, did she even want to leave? The first frost came early that year, silvering the grass and turning breath to smoke in the morning air. Clara had been with the McCall brothers for 3 weeks now, and the strange rhythm of their isolated life had begun to feel almost normal. She rose before dawn to start the coffee, worked through the day at endless chores, and fell into bed exhausted but somehow more alive than she'd felt in years. The hard work agreed with her. Her hands, once soft from a life of genteel domesticity, grew calloused from hauling water and scrubbing floors. Her arms strengthened from kneading bread and wringing laundry. The mirror showed her face brown from the sun, her body lean and capable in a way it had never been as Samuel's ornamental wife. "You're getting good at that," Eli observed one morning, watching her split kindling with practiced swings of the hatchet. "Necessity's a fine teacher," Clara replied, adding the wood to her pile. "Though I'll never match what you and Ezra can do. Don't sell yourself short." He picked up an axe and began splitting larger logs alongside her, their rhythms falling into sync. "You've taken to this life better than most would." It was true, and the truth of it surprised her. She'd discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known existed, found satisfaction in tasks that would have horrified the proper ladies of Cedar Falls. When had she become this woman who could butcher a chicken without flinching? Who could haul water from the creek and patch a leaking roof? The memories of her old life still haunted her in quiet moments. She'd catch herself setting the table for 3 and remember Samuel's cold silence at their meals together. Or she'd see Eli's gentle smile and recall how her husband had stopped smiling at her entirely those last months. The doctor's pronouncement echoed in her dreams. Barren, nothing to be done. One afternoon, while patching a hole in the barn wall, Clara heard Eli's voice drifting from the feed room. At first she thought he was talking to one of the horses, but the cadence was wrong. Too formal, too reverent. She crept closer, knowing she shouldn't eavesdrop but unable to help herself. "Would have been 5 this year," Eli was saying softly. "Would have taught him to ride that little pinto. Would have shown him how to read the weather, track deer. All the things a father should." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. A child. Eli had lost a child. "Sarah, I hope you're looking after him up there. Hope you both know I think of you every day. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry for so many things." The grief in his voice was raw as an open wound. Clara backed away silently, her heart aching for this gentleman who carried such loss. It explained the sadness that sometimes crossed his features when he thought no one was looking, the way he'd grow quiet at unexpected moments. That night at supper, she watched Eli differently. He caught her looking and raised an eyebrow in question, but she just shook her head and passed the biscuits. Some secrets weren't hers to acknowledge. Ezra, as always, ate in brooding silence. He'd been more distant than ever lately, disappearing for hours into the wild country beyond their valley. Clara had given up trying to draw him into conversation, accepting his taciturn nature as she accepted the wind and rocks. A week later, winter arrived in earnest with a blizzard that howled down from the mountains like a living thing. The temperature plummeted so fast that ice formed on the water buckets between the well and the house. They worked frantically to prepare, bringing the horses into the barn, securing shutters, stacking firewood high against the walls. "This is a bad one," Eli said, squinting at the wall of white approaching across the valley. "Could be stuck inside for days." They made it to shelter just as the storm hit. The wind screamed around the cabin corners, driving snow through every tiny gap in the chinking, even with the fire roaring. Cold crept across the floor like searching fingers. Clara was banking the kitchen fire for the night when she realized Ezra hadn't come in from the barn. "Where is he?" she asked Eli, who was securing a loose shutter. Eli cursed, a rare occurrence. "Stubborn fool said he was checking on that new colt one more time." They waited, tension mounting as the storm's fury increased. Finally, Eli reached for his coat. "No," Clara said firmly. "You can't see your hand in front of your face out there. You'll be lost in seconds." I can't lose him too, Eli said, and the desperation in his voice told her everything about what he'd already lost. Before either could move, the door burst open in a swirl of snow and wind. Ezra stumbled in, more ice than man, dragging something behind him, a young foal, barely breathing. Damn fool mare dropped it in the far stall, he gasped through blue lips. Couldn't leave it to freeze. They worked together to warm both man and animal. Clara heated water while Eli helped his brother out of frozen clothes. The foal they wrapped in old blankets by the fire, rubbing its limbs to restore circulation. You could have died, Clara said sharply as she forced hot coffee into Ezra's shaking hands. For a horse, his dark eyes met hers over the cup rim. Everything dies. Question is what it's for. It was the most philosophical thing she'd heard him say. As the night wore on and the storm raged, they huddled around the fire. The foal survived, struggling to its feet to nurse from a bottle Clara prepared. Ezra stayed close to it, his usual harsh expression softened by concern. He's always been like that, Eli said quietly to Clara as they watched. Can't pass by anything hurting without trying to help, even when it costs him. What did it cost him? Clara asked before she could stop herself. Eli's face closed. That's his story to tell, if he ever chooses to. 3 days the blizzard trapped them. 3 days of card games and stories, of keeping the fire fed and the animals alive. The forced proximity revealed things. How Eli hummed while he whittled, carving tiny horses from pine scraps. How Ezra would forget to scowl when absorbed in a book of poetry Clara found hidden in his room while cleaning. On the 3rd night, the wind finally died. They ventured out into a world transformed. Snow drifted higher than their heads in places, working together to dig paths to the barn and well. Clara felt something had shifted during their confinement. The boundaries between them had blurred. Just a little. That evening, exhausted from shoveling, they sat closer to the fire than usual. Clara was mending one of Ezra's shirts when she pricked her finger, a bright bead of blood welling up. Here, Eli said, reaching for her hand. He wrapped his handkerchief around the tiny wound with unnecessary care, his calloused fingers gentle on hers. It's nothing, Clara said, but her voice came out breathless. Still. He didn't let go immediately, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. The touch sent heat through her that had nothing to do with the fire. A log crashed in the hearth, making them both jump. Ezra stood in the kitchen doorway, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. I'll check the stock, he said abruptly, and was gone before either could respond. I should, Clara began. Stay, Eli said softly. Please, just sit with me a while. She did, though every proper instinct screamed against it. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire die to embers. When Eli's hand found hers again in the darkness, she didn't pull away. But later, lying in her narrow bed, Clara heard Ezra's voice through the wall, low and angry. You know what you're doing. Maybe I don't care anymore. Eli replied, You will. When she leaves. When she realizes what we are. What you can't give her. You'll care then. That's my risk to take. Is it? You think you're the only one who... Ezra's voice cut off abruptly. Clara pulled her quilt over her head, but she couldn't shut out the implications of what she'd heard. What couldn't Eli give her? What were they that would drive her away? And why did Ezra's unfinished sentence make her heart race? The next morning brought awkwardness as thick as the snow outside. Eli was overly polite. Ezra wouldn't meet her eyes. And Clara threw herself into cooking an elaborate breakfast none of them had appetite for. She was scrubbing pots with unnecessary vigor when a memory surfaced. Samuel's sister whispering to a friend. Not knowing Clara could hear. Of course he's leaving her. What use is a woman who can't give a man children? She's not a real woman at all. The pot slipped from her numb fingers, clattering on the floor. Not a real woman, barren, worthless. The words circled like vultures. Clara? Eli appeared in the doorway. You all right? She couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. He crossed to her in 2 strides, turning her gently to face him. "What is it? What's wrong?" "I can't," she whispered. "I can't have children? That's why my husband cast me aside. I'm not whole." She expected him to step back, to show the same disgust Samuel had. Instead, his hands cupped her face with infinite tenderness. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You are the strongest, most capable woman I've ever known. You've brought life back to this place just by being here. That makes you more woman than most could dream of being." Tears she'd held for months finally broke free. Eli pulled her against his chest, holding her while she sobbed out her grief and shame. His shirt grew damp under her cheek, but he just stroked her hair and murmured wordless comfort. Neither of them saw Ezra in the doorway, watching with eyes that held their own kind of pain. The days following Clara's breakdown passed in a strange dance of avoidance. She threw herself into work with renewed fervor, as if constant motion could outrun the vulnerability she'd shown. Eli gave her space but watched with concerned eyes. Ezra had become even more of a ghost, leaving before dawn and returning after dark. Winter's grip slowly loosened as February crept toward March. The snow began its slow retreat, revealing the earth beneath in muddy patches. With the thaw came new challenges: fences damaged by the weight of snow, streams swollen with meltwater, and a dozen other repairs that winter had delayed. One afternoon, while Eli was in town for supplies, disaster struck. Clara was in the barn when she heard the crash and Ezra's sharp cry of pain. She found him pinned beneath a fallen beam, his leg bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. "Get Eli," he gritted out, face white with pain. "He won't be back for hours." Clara knelt beside him, assessing the situation. The beam was massive, far too heavy for her to lift alone. "Can you move your leg?" "Don't think so." Sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool air. "Just leave me. I'll manage. Don't be ridiculous." Clara stood, mind racing. She'd seen her father free a trapped cow once using leverage and rope. "I'll be right back." She rigged a primitive pulley system using rope and a sturdy overhead beam, working with desperate efficiency. Ezra watched through pain-glazed eyes, occasionally offering terse suggestions. It took an hour of back-breaking effort. But finally, she managed to raise the beam enough for him to drag himself free. His leg wasn't broken, thank God, but badly bruised and swollen. Clara half-carried him to the small lean-to that served as a bunkhouse when they hired seasonal help, settling him on the narrow cot. "I need to look at it properly," she said, reaching for his boot. His hand caught her wrist. "I can manage." "No, you can't." She met his glare steadily. "I've seen worse than a man's bare leg. Ezra McCall. Now stop being stubborn before that swelling does permanent damage." Something in her tone must have reached him because his hand dropped. Clara worked his boot off as gently as possible, trying not to react to his suppressed groans. The bruising was spectacular, purple-black and spreading. "It needs cold," she said. "I'll get snow." She packed snow in feed sacks and arranged them around his leg, then tore strips from a clean sheet for bandages. All the while, Ezra watched her with an expression she couldn't read. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why what? Why help me? I've been nothing but cold to you." Clara paused in her rapping. "Because that's what people do. They help each other. Your husband didn't help you." The words hit like a slap. Clara's hand stilled on the bandage. "No," she said quietly. "He didn't." "Then why believe anyone would?" She looked up at him then, really looked, past the harsh exterior to the pain that lived beneath, not just physical pain, but something deeper, older. "Because I choose to," she said simply. "Because the alternative is letting bitterness poison everything good that's left." Ezra turned his face away, but not before she saw something crack in his expression. She finished the bandaging in silence, then brought him water and some of the laudanum they kept for emergencies. He needed food too. Hot soup to ward off shock. She'd have to keep the stove going in the bunkhouse. It would get cold once the sun went down. "I'll bring supper out here," she said, gathering the medical supplies. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She cut him off. You're hurt and alone out here. That's not happening on my watch." As she turned to go, his voice stopped her. "My wife died birthing our son, 5 years ago this spring." Clara froze, her hand on the door latch. "The baby came too early," Ezra continued, his voice flat and distant. "Storm like the one we just had, no way to get help. I tried everything, but they both died, right there in our bed. I couldn't save them." Clara turned back slowly. Ezra stared at the ceiling, his jaw tight with remembered agony. "The ladies in town said it was God's will, said maybe it was better, since Mary wasn't strong enough for frontier life anyway, like weakness was some kind of sin that deserved punishment." "That's not true," Clara whispered. "Isn't it?" His laugh was bitter. "We all got our punishments. You can't have babies. My babies died. Eli lost his Sarah and their boy to fever. Maybe we're all just broken things pretending to be whole." Clara moved back to the cot, sitting carefully on its edge. "Maybe broken things can still be useful. A cracked pot still holds water. A 3-legged stool still stands." Pretty words. True words. She hesitated, then placed her hand over his where it clenched the blanket. "I'm sorry about your wife and son. Sorry you had to bear that alone." His hand turned under hers, fingers interlacing. His grip was almost painful, like a drowning man clutching at rope. "Eli talks about you," he said roughly. "At night when he thinks I'm asleep. Says you're bringing light back to this place. Says maybe we could start over. Be something more than 2 ghosts haunting these hills." Clara's heart thundered in her chest. "And what do you say?" "I say hope's more dangerous than dynamite. At least with dynamite, you know it'll blow up in your face. But you're still here, still getting up each morning, caring for the animals, keeping the ranch going. That's hope, whether you call it that or not." Ezra's dark eyes finally met hers. "You always this stubborn? Always?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "Fair warning." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a softening. Mary was stubborn too. Gentle as spring rain most times, but get her mind set on something and mountains would move first. They sat in companionable silence as shadows lengthened outside. Clara knew she should go start supper, but something held her there. This was the most Ezra had ever said to her, the first time he'd let her see past his walls. "I should check that leg again," she said finally. "It's fine. Let me be the judge of that." She unwrapped the bandages carefully. The swelling had gone down some, thanks to the snow. As she worked, she was aware of Ezra watching her, his gaze weightier than before. "You're good at this," he said. "I've had practice. My father bred horses. Treating injuries was part of life." "Is that where you learned to ride?" "Yes, Papa said I could ride before I could properly walk." The memory brought unexpected warmth. He'd be ashamed to see me now, his daughter who was supposed to marry well and raise grandchildren. Instead, she's a runaway tending strangers in the wilderness. I think he'd be proud. Clara looked up, surprised by the conviction in Ezra's voice. "You survived," he continued. "Picked yourself up when everything fell apart and kept going. Found your way here through country that kills men twice your size. That takes courage most never find." Tears pricked her eyes. She bent back to her work to hide them. The door burst open, making them both jump. Eli stood there, wild-eyed, taking in the scene, Ezra on the cot. Clara bent over his bare leg. "What happened? I saw the beam down in the barn." "I'm fine," Ezra said. "Clara got me out." Eli's gaze swung to Clara, a mix of emotions crossing his face. "You lifted that beam?" "I used leverage and rope. Simple mechanics." "Simple." Eli shook his head, moving into the small space. "That beam weighs 300 pounds. I couldn't leave him trapped." The brothers exchanged a look that seemed to hold an entire conversation. Finally. Eli knelt beside the cot, examining his brother's leg with practiced hands. "No breaks." He concluded. "You got lucky." "Wasn't luck," Ezra said quietly. "It was her." That evening, they ate supper in the bunkhouse, unwilling to move Ezra unnecessarily. Clara had made a pot of stew, Rich with preserved vegetables and wild game, the small space felt intimate with all three of them there, lamplight creating a circle of warmth against the darkness outside. "Remember when we first built this place?" Eli asked, gesturing at the walls. "You insisted on that ridiculous window facing east. Mary wanted to see the sunrise," Ezra said softly. Said starting the day with beauty made everything else bearable. It was the first time Clara had heard him speak his wife's name with something other than pain. "She was right," Eli said. "Usually was about most things. Except my cooking. Woman could burn water." "That's true. Remember the time she tried to make biscuits and we used them to patch the roof?" A ghost of a smile crossed Ezra's face. "Kept the rain out better than shingles." Clara listened to them trade memories, understanding this was rare, this gentle recollection instead of buried grief. She rose to clear the dishes, but Eli caught her hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For today, for everything." His touch sent familiar warmth through her. But now Ezra was watching too, and his gaze held something new. Not suspicion or warning, but a kind of recognition. "I should go," Clara said softly. "Early morning tomorrow." "Stay," Ezra said suddenly. Both Clara and Eli turned to stare at him. "It's dark. Path's tricky. Eli can bunk with me. You take his cot." Clara looked between them, reading layers of meaning in the simple offer. Ezra was right. The path back to the main cabin was treacherous in full dark. But more than that, this felt like a test, or perhaps an invitation. "All right," she agreed. "Later." Lying on Eli's cot, which smelled of leather and pine. Clara listened to the brothers' quiet breathing. Through the thin walls, she heard one of them, Eli, she thought, whisper something. Ezra's rumbled response was too low to catch, but it sounded like agreement. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Clara felt she might truly belong here, not just as a housekeeper or temporary guest, but as something more, something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, and its mate answered. The sound should have been lonely, but tonight it spoke of connection across the darkness, of finding your pack, even in the wilderness, especially in the wilderness. The weeks following Ezra's injury brought an unexpected shift in the household's dynamics. His leg healed slowly, keeping him closer to home than usual. Clara found herself spending more time with both brothers, the three of them falling into new patterns that felt both natural and charged with unspoken possibility. Spring arrived in earnest, painting the valley with wildflowers and filling the air with the scent of sage and new grass. The melt had swollen the creek to twice its normal size, and everywhere life pushed up through the earth with desperate urgency. Clara was hanging laundry one morning when she noticed riders approaching from the south. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle they kept by the door, a precaution Eli had insisted on after teaching her to shoot. "Company?" she called to Ezra, who was mending tack on the porch, his legs still too weak for heavy work. He stood carefully, shading his eyes. "That's the Hendricks brothers, neighbors from about 20 miles south. Wonder what brings them here." The riders were young men, perhaps early 20s, with the easy confidence of those born to the saddle. They tipped their hats to Clara as they dismounted. "Ma'am," the older one said. "Ezra, heard you took a bad spill." "News travels," Ezra said dryly. "Tom, James, this is Mrs. Winslow. She's helping us out." Clara noticed how he didn't say housekeeper or hired help, just that she was helping. The distinction wasn't lost on the visitors, whose eyes sharpened with interest. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Winslow," Tom Hendricks said, his smile a shade too warm. "Must say, it's a surprise finding a lady way out here. A pleasant one." "Coffee?" Clara offered, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "That'd be right kind of you." She served them on the porch, aware of how Tom's eyes followed her movements. He was handsome in a boyish way, with sun-bleached hair and an easy manner, the kind of man who'd never been told no by a woman. "So where's Mr. Winslow?" James asked with studied casualness. "I'm a widow," Clara said shortly. "Sorry for your loss." Tom's sympathy rang false. Must be hard, being alone. I'm not alone, Clara said, then wished she hadn't as Tom's smile widened. Eli returned from the far pasture then, and Clara saw his expression darken as he took in the scene. He swung down from his horse with deliberate ease. Tom, James, what brings you boys out this way? Looking to buy some horses, Tom said, but his eyes stayed on Clara. Heard you might have some to sell. Not this year, Eli said flatly. Maybe we could work something out. I'd be happy to come by regular, discussed terms. Tom winked at Clara. Always did like the scenery up here. Ezra made a sound that might have been a cough or a laugh. Eli's jaw tightened. Like I said, nothing for sale. You boys best be heading back before dark. The dismissal was clear, but Tom lingered. Mrs. Winslow, if you ever need anything at all, our place isn't far. Be happy to help a lady in need. The lady's not in need, Ezra said quietly, and something in his tone made Tom step back. After they left, trailing dust and backward glances, Clara found herself shaking with delayed reaction. Not fear exactly, but awareness of her vulnerability. A woman alone, or nearly alone, in the wilderness was fair game to men like Tom Hendricks. You all right? Eli asked, his hand gentle on her shoulder. Fine. I'd forgotten what it was like. Being seen as available. You're not available, Eli said firmly, then colored as he realized how that sounded. I mean, you're under our protection. This roof. No one will bother you here. And when I leave? Clara asked softly. What then? Neither brother answered, but the silence spoke volumes. That night, Clara lay wakeful, thinking about Tom Hendricks' hungry eyes and what they represented. Out here, a woman needed protection, a name, a man, a place to belong. She'd fled one cage only to find the wilderness full of different dangers. Through her window, she could see light in the barn, unable to bear her circling thoughts. She pulled a shawl over her nightgown and ventured out. She found Eli there, working on a broken bridle by lantern light. Couldn't sleep either, he asked without looking up. Too much thinking. I know the feeling. He set down his work, giving her his full attention. Tom Hendricks is a fool, but he's harmless, mostly. It's not about him specifically. Clara sat on a hay bale, tucking her bare feet under her gown. It's what he represents. The fact that I'll always be vulnerable, always need someone's protection. That's not weakness. That's just how the world is made. For women. For everyone. We all need protecting sometimes. Look at Ezra. If you hadn't been there when that beam fell. That's different. Is it? Eli moved to sit beside her, careful to maintain proper distance. Clara, you've protected us too. This place was dying before you came. Just two broken men going through the motions. You brought it back to life. I just cleaned and cooked. No. His voice held unusual firmness. You did more than that, and you know it. The lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows. Outside, an owl called, the sound lonely in the darkness. Clara shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. You're cold, Eli said. We should go in. Not yet. I like it here. It's peaceful. They sat in companionable silence, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. Clara was acutely aware of Eli's presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the way his hands rested on his knees. Strong hands, gentle hands. Can I tell you something? Eli asked suddenly. I dream about them sometimes. Sarah and little James. They're always just out of reach, walking away through tall grass. I call out, but they can't hear me. He paused, swallowing hard. Used to wake up and reach for Sarah's side of the bed. The emptiness was like falling off a cliff. Clara's hand found his without conscious thought, their fingers intertwining. But lately, he continued, lately I wake up and think about coffee already made, about your laugh when the rooster chases you, about how you hum while you work, and for the first time in 5 years, the emptiness doesn't swallow me whole. Eli, Clara breathed, but he pressed on. I know it's not proper. No, you deserve better than a broken-down rancher who can barely keep his head above water. But Clara, She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought out. One moment they were sitting apart. The next she was in his arms, her mouth on his, tasting coffee and possibility. He made a sound like a drowning man finding air, his hands tangling in her loose hair. The kiss was everything her marriage bed had never been. Heat and hunger and hope all mingled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara felt like she'd been remade. "I'm sorry," Eli said hoarsely. "I shouldn't have." "Don't you dare apologize," Clara said fiercely. "Don't you dare take this back." He studied her face in the lamplight, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "What are we doing, Clara?" "Living," she said simply. "Finally living." But even as he kissed her again, softer this time, Clara heard footsteps outside. They sprang apart as Ezra appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "House is on fire," he said flatly. "Thought you'd want to know." It took a moment for the words to penetrate. Then Eli was running, Clara close behind, to find smoke pouring from the kitchen window. They formed a bucket brigade from the creek, working with desperate efficiency. The fire had started in the chimney, creosote buildup, probably, but they caught it before it spread to the main structure. Afterward, sitting on the porch in the pre-dawn darkness, covered in soot and ash, the three of them surveyed the damage. The kitchen would need work, but the house stood. "Could have been worse," Eli said. "Could have been." Ezra agreed. His eyes found Clara's across the space between them. Good thing someone was awake to notice. Heat that had nothing to do with fire crept up Clara's neck. She knew he'd seen them in the barn, knew what conclusions he'd drawn, but his expression held no judgment, only a weary kind of understanding. "I'll start cleaning up," she said, needing to move, to do something with her hands. "Sun's not even up yet," Eli protested. "No point trying to sleep now." She worked through the morning, scrubbing soot from every surface, grateful for the distraction. But her mind kept returning to the barn, to Eli's mouth on hers, to the way her whole body had come alive at his touch. And underneath that, Ezra's words from weeks ago. "You think you're the only one who what? Who wanted her? Who saw her as more than a housekeeper?" The possibility made her hands shake as she wrung out blackened rags. Ezra found her there as full daylight streamed through the damaged window. He moved carefully, his legs still giving him trouble. "You need to eat something," he said, setting down a plate with biscuits and jam. "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway." He lowered himself onto a chair with a grimace. "Clara, what happened with Eli?" "Nothing happened," she said quickly. "I have eyes." His voice was gentle, gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I'm not blind to what's been building between you two." Clara's hands stilled on the rag. "And you disapprove." "I didn't say that." She looked up, meeting his dark gaze. "Then what? What is it you want to say?" Ezra was quiet for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with something internal. "Finally, I want to say that Eli's a good man who deserves happiness, that you're a good woman who deserves the same, and that nothing in this life is ever as simple as we want it to be." What does that mean? But he was already standing, reaching for his hat. "Means you should eat those biscuits before they get cold. I'll be in the barn if you need me." He limped out, leaving Clara alone with her confusion and a plate of food that might as well have been sawdust for all her appetite. Through the window, she could see Eli working on temporary repairs to the chimney, his movements sure and competent. Soon she'd have to face him, have to decide what last night meant and where they went from here, have to face the growing certainty that her feelings encompassed not just Eli, but his difficult, damaged brother as well. The thought terrified her more than any fire. But first, she'd finish cleaning. One task at a time, one moment at a time. It was the only way she knew to move forward when the path ahead was obscured by smoke. The decision to leave came to Clara on a morning when the sky stretched endlessly blue and the meadowlarks sang like their hearts would burst. She stood at the kitchen window, watching Eli and Ezra work together to repair the corral fence, and knew with sudden clarity that she couldn't stay. The kiss in the barn had changed everything, and nothing. Eli treated her with exquisite politeness, careful not to be alone with her, careful not to touch even accidentally. Ezra watched them both with knowing eyes, his silence heavier than any words. The very air in the house seemed charged with things unsaid, desires unacknowledged. She couldn't live like this, balanced on a knife's edge between what was proper and what her heart wanted. Better to leave now, while she still could, before she destroyed the fragile peace between the brothers or lost herself entirely. Clara packed quietly, taking only what she'd brought plus the small wages they'd insisted on paying her. She left a note on the kitchen table, simple and direct. "Thank you for everything. Please don't follow. C." The morning was still cool as she saddled Buttermilk, her hand steady despite the ache in her chest. The mare seemed to sense her mood, standing quietly as Clara secured her meager belonging out. She was leading Buttermilk from the barn when Ezra appeared, moving more quickly than his healing legs should allow. "Running away?" he asked, taking in her traveling clothes and packed bags. "Leaving," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He stepped closer, and she could see the muscle working in his jaw. "Seems like the same thing from where I'm standing." "I can't stay here. Ezra, you know why. I know you're scared." The accusation stung because it was true. "Of course I'm scared. She struggled for words. "I'm feeling things I shouldn't. Things that could hurt all of us. Feelings don't hurt people. Running from them does." Clara laughed bitterly. "Says the man who's been running from his feelings for 5 years. Something flashed in Ezra's eyes. Pain or anger or both. "Maybe I'm tired of running." Before Clara could respond, he closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face. "Maybe I'm tired of watching chances pass by because I'm too damaged to reach for them. Ezra, you saved me," he said roughly. "Not just from that beam, from myself, from turning into stone inside. I watch you with Eli, see how you bring him back to life, and I tell myself to be grateful. Tell myself it's enough to see you both happy. But I'm a selfish man. Clara, I want—" She never found out what he wanted because Eli's voice cut through the morning air. "What's going on here?" They sprang apart like guilty children. Eli stood in the barn doorway, taking in the scene. Clara dressed for travel, Ezra's hands dropping from her face, Buttermilk saddled and ready. "She's leaving," Ezra said unnecessarily. Eli's face went carefully blank. "I see. When? Now," Clara said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I think it's best." "Best for who?" Eli asked quietly. He moved toward them slowly, as if approaching spooked horses. "Clara, if this is about what happened in the barn, it's about all of it," she burst out. "Don't you see? I can't be what you need, either of you. I'm broken. Stop!" Eli's voice cracked like a whip. "Just stop. You think we care about children you can't have? You think that matters one bit compared to losing you? You don't understand. Then explain it." This from Ezra, who'd moved to block her path to Buttermilk. "Make us understand why you'd rather run than stay and fight for something real." Clara looked between them, Eli with his heart in his eyes, Ezra with his walls finally crumbling, and felt her own defenses shatter. "Because I'm falling in love with both of you," she said, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "And that's wrong and impossible, and it'll tear you apart. Brothers shouldn't—" "I can't be the thing that comes between you." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. A hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the stillness. Finally, Eli spoke. "Do you remember what I told you that first night? Sometimes, far from everything is exactly where a person needs to be." "What does that have to do with—" "We're already outside society's rules," he continued. "Living out here where the law barely reaches, where a day's ride might bring you to another human soul. We make our own way, our own choices." "Eli's right," Ezra said quietly. "Out here, the only rules that matter are the ones we set ourselves." Clara shook her head. "You're brothers. What I feel, it's not natural." "Natural?" Ezra laughed, harsh and short. "What's natural about any of this? You think it's natural for two men to live alone on a mountain, talking to horses more than humans? Think it's natural to shut yourself away from any chance of happiness because the world says you should? We've already lost everything once, Eli added, his voice rough with emotion. Wives, children, the lives we planned. You want us to lose you too because of what people might think? People who'll never set foot in this valley? Clara's vision blurred with tears. I don't want to hurt you, either of you. Then stay, Ezra said simply. Stay and let us figure it out together, like we figured out the fire, the blizzard, everything else, together. How? Clara whispered. How could it even work? The brothers exchanged a look that spoke of midnight conversations she hadn't been privy to. Mary used to read us stories, Ezra said unexpectedly. Greek myths, ancient tales, gods and goddesses who loved in ways mortals couldn't understand. She'd say love was bigger than our small human rules. Sarah was the practical one, Eli added with a sad smile. Would have called us fools, then figured out how to make it work anyway. She had a gift for that, making impossible things possible. Clara felt herself weakening, her resolve crumbling like sand. People would say that I'm immoral, a fallen woman. You're the strongest, most moral person I know, Eli said fiercely. And I'll fight anyone who says otherwise. With what harsh words and disappointment? Ezra asked dryly. But there was fondness in it. I'm the fighter, remember? We both are, when it matters. Eli countered. And this matters. Clara stood there, pulled between the life she'd been taught to want and the one her heart was crying out for. The morning sun climbed higher, warming her face, and she thought about all the mornings that could follow. Waking in this valley, working alongside these men who'd somehow become essential to her breathing. If I stay, she said slowly, we do this honestly. No hiding, no pretending, not from each other. Agreed, both brothers said simultaneously. And we take it slow. Figure out what this is, how it works. Whatever you need, Eli assured her. Clara took a shaking breath. Then I suppose I should unpack. The relief on both their faces was almost comical. Ezra actually smiled, a real smile that transformed his harsh features. I'll take care of Buttermilk, he offered, reaching for the reins. I'll help you carry your things back in, Eli added. I can manage. Clara protested, but they were already moving, working together with the same easy coordination they showed in everything else. As she followed them back toward the house, Clara felt something settle in her chest. This wasn't the life she'd planned. Wasn't anything she could have imagined even 6 months ago. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the best things came from the unexpected, the unconventional, the choices that defied easy categorization. That evening, they sat together on the porch as they had so many times before, but everything felt different. Clara was acutely aware of her position between them, of how Eli's shoulder nearly touched hers, how Ezra's boot rested near her foot. We'll need to expand the house, Ezra said suddenly. Add proper rooms. Can't have you sleeping in that lean-to forever. Already drawing up plans in my head, Eli admitted, thinking a real parlor, maybe a bathing room. Glass windows, Clara added dreamily. Real ones, not just oiled paper. Windows it is, Eli agreed. Anything else? A bigger kitchen, with a proper stove. Done. They planned and dreamed as the stars came out, mapping a future that had seemed impossible just hours before. When the night grew cold, they moved inside. But the conversation continued. Finally, Clara stood to retire. At her door, she paused, looking back at them. Thank you, she said simply, for not letting me run. Thank you, Ezra countered, for being brave enough to stay. After she closed her door, Clara heard them talking in low voices, not arguing this time, but planning, working through the practicalities of their unconventional choice. She smiled in the darkness, feeling for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Tom Hendricks would likely return with his hungry eyes. The townsfolk would eventually learn of their arrangement, and judgment would follow. But tonight, in this house built on frontier dreams and second chances, none of that mattered. She was home. Spring melted into summer, and with it came a rhythm of life that felt both new and ancient. Clara rose each morning to find coffee already made, sometimes by Eli's hand, sometimes Ezra's, and the three of them moved through their days with a choreography born of growing understanding. The house expansion progressed slowly but steadily. They worked in the evenings when the heat loosened its grip, framing new rooms with lumber hauled from town. Clara learned to handle a hammer and saw, her hands growing ever more capable. The glass windows she'd dreamed of arrived wrapped in straw and prayer, surviving the journey intact. Like jewels, she breathed as Eli held one up to the light. More precious than jewels, Ezra corrected, calculating the cost in his head. But worth it to see you smile like that. They were careful with each other, mindful of boundaries still being negotiated, a brush of hands while passing tools, a moment's pause when proximity brought them close, glances that lingered just shy of impropriety. It was a dance none of them quite knew the steps to, but they were learning. The first test came on a sweltering July day when Tom Hendricks returned, this time with his father and a proposition. "Heard you folks are expanding," the elder Hendricks said, eyes taking in the new construction. "Might be you're planning to settle more permanent-like." "Might be," Ezra agreed, giving nothing away. "Well then, seems to me you'll be needing more hands. My Tom here's a hard worker. Wouldn't mind hiring on for the season. Give him a chance to learn from experienced ranchers." Clara saw through the ploy immediately. Tom's eager gaze never left her face, and his father's calculated casualness fooled no one. "We manage fine on our own," Eli said evenly. "Do you now?" Hendricks Sr.'s eyes narrowed. "3 people for a spread this size, and one of them a woman. Folks in town might wonder exactly what kind of operation you're running here." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt both brothers tense, ready to defend their choices with words or fists if necessary, but she stepped forward before they could speak. "Mr. Hendricks," she said pleasantly, "how kind of you to concern yourself with our welfare. Please, won't you come in for some lemonade? You must be parched after your long ride." Thrown off balance by her hospitality, the men had little choice but to accept. Clara served them in her finest manner, every inch the proper hostess, while skillfully redirecting every probe and insinuation. "Your wife must miss you terribly, being gone so long," she said to Tom. "Oh, you're not married? How surprising, a fine man like you. But then the right woman is worth waiting for, don't you think?" By the time they left, Tom thoroughly discouraged and his father confused about exactly what he'd witnessed. Clara was exhausted, but triumphant. "That was masterful," Eli said admiringly. "Reminded me of watching a cat play with mice." Ezra added, "Poor fools never knew what hit them." Clara sank into a chair, suddenly shaking. "They'll be back, or others like them. We can't keep pretending forever." "Then we stop pretending," Ezra said simply. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, they needed supplies from town, more lumber, nails, flour, and dozen other necessities. Usually one brother went while the other stayed with Clara, but the load would be too much for one man. "We all go," Eli decided. "Together. Let people see us as we are." The ride to town took 4 hours through country that still took Clara's breath away. Red mesas rose like ancient castles, and eagles circled in a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She rode between the brothers, buttermilk steady and sure beneath her. They smelled the smoke before they saw it. "Fire!" Ezra said unnecessarily, spurring his horse forward. The scene that greeted them in town was chaos. The mercantile was ablaze, flames already spreading to the buildings on either side. A bucket brigade had formed, but they were fighting a losing battle. Without hesitation, all 3 joined the line. Clara worked between Eli and Ezra, passing buckets until her arms screamed and her hands went numb. Others joined, the banker, the minister. Even Tom Hendricks and his father. In crisis. Social divisions meant nothing. It took hours, but they saved most of the street. The mercantile was a total loss, but they'd kept the fire from consuming the entire town. As Clara collapsed against a water trough, gasping and soot-covered, she became aware of eyes on them. The good wives of the town, the proper ladies who'd never acknowledged her existence, were staring. At her. At the brothers who flanked her protectively. At the way Eli's hand rested on her shoulder while Ezra offered her his canteen. Mrs. Morrison, the judge's wife who'd once urged Clara to leave town, approached slowly. "Mrs. Winslow," she said formally. That was good work today. "We all did what was needed," Clara replied, too exhausted for anything but honesty. The older woman's gaze traveled between the three of them, taking in details Clara was too tired to hide, the way she'd leaned into Eli's touch, how her hand accepted Ezra's canteen with casual intimacy. "Indeed," Mrs. Morrison said finally. "Sometimes what's needed isn't what's expected." She walked away before Clara could puzzle out her meaning, but others approached. The minister's wife offered them use of her wash basin to clean up. The doctor checked them for burns. Even the saloon keeper, a rough man named Murphy, slapped Ezra on the back and offered to buy them drinks. "You folks fought like demons," he said admiringly. "Town owes you." They stayed the night, too exhausted to make the journey home in darkness. The hotel keeper, who'd lost his stable to the fire, offered them rooms at no charge. 2 rooms or 3, he asked, and something in his tone said the answer mattered. 2, Eli said calmly. 1 for the lady, 1 for my brother and me. If the man found it odd that Clara required no chaperone, he didn't comment. Perhaps saving his hotel earned them that much grace. Clara lay in the narrow hotel bed, listening to the town settle into sleep. Through the thin wall, she could hear the brothers talking quietly. About the fire, the work still needed at home. Anything but what had really happened today. They'd been seen, not just as 3 people living together, but as something more. The careful touches, the unconscious intimacy, the way they moved as a unit, it had all been on display. And somehow, the world hadn't ended. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find both brothers in the hallway, looking uncertain. "Couldn't sleep," Eli admitted. "Kept thinking about today," Ezra added. "How you could have been hurt." Clara stepped aside, letting them in. Propriety be damned. They'd already crossed those lines. They sat on the floor, backs against the bed, shoulders touching. The moonlight through the window turned everything silver and shadow. "I was scared," Clara admitted. "Not of the fire, of what would happen when people saw us together." "And?" Eli prompted. "And nothing happened. The world kept turning." "Disappointed?" Ezra asked with dry humor. "Relieved," Clara corrected. "I'm tired of being afraid." She turned to Eli first, cupping his face in her hands. "I love you," she said simply, then kissed him with all the tenderness she'd been holding back. When they parted, she turned to Ezra, seeing vulnerability crack through his perpetual armor. "And I love you," she told him, sealing the words with a kiss that tasted of smoke and promises. "Clara," Ezra breathed against her lips, and she felt him tremble. They held each other in the darkness. 3 souls who'd found their way to each other against all odds. Tomorrow they'd return home, finish building their unconventional life. There would be challenges, gossip, judgment, the complex navigation of 3 hearts trying to beat as one. But tonight, in a hotel room that smelled of smoke and salvation, they were simply together. It was enough. It was everything. "We should go before someone sees," Eli said eventually, though he made no move to leave. "Let them see," Clara said fiercely. "I'm done hiding." "Even from the minister's wife?" Ezra asked. "She looked ready to organize a prayer meeting for your soul, especially from her, though she did lend me her good soap. Probably hoping to wash the sin off you," Eli suggested. "Too late for that," Clara said. surprising a laugh from both men. "I'm thoroughly corrupted now." They talked until dawn painted the sky pink, planning their future with the same practical determination they brought to everything. A horse rescue operation, taking in animals too broken for others to bother with. It seemed fitting, broken creatures helping each other heal. When they finally returned to the ranch, it felt different. Not the place itself, but how they moved through it. The careful distances they'd maintained dissolved. Clara found herself pulled into embraces throughout the day. Eli catching her for a kiss while she kneaded bread. Ezra drawing her close as they watched the sunset. "Is this real?" she asked one evening as they sat together on the porch they'd built with their own hands. "Real as anything gets," Ezra assured her. "More real than anything I had before," Eli added. Clara believed them. In a land where survival meant adapting, where conventional rules bent before necessity, they'd created something unprecedented. Love that defied easy definition. Family that transcended blood. Home that welcomed all who needed healing. The glass windows caught the last light of day, throwing rainbows across the floor. Clara smiled, remembering how precious they'd seemed. Now she knew the truth. The real treasures were the two men beside her and the life they were building together. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked, noting her expression. "That I'm glad I got lost." Clara said, "Best wrong turn I ever made." "Our gain," Ezra said quietly, and the warmth in his voice made her heart soar. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara felt a peace she'd never known before. This was her place. These were her people. And this unconventional love was her truth. Let the world think what it would, here in their valley, with walls they'd raised and dreams they'd shared. They were home. The letter arrived on a crisp October morning, carried by a rider who looked distinctly uncomfortable with his mission. Clara recognized the elegant handwriting before she even opened it. Samuel's sister. Margaret always did have beautiful penmanship. "What is it?" Eli asked, noting her sudden pallor. Clara read aloud, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Have located you through various inquiries. Samuel wishes to discuss the irregular nature of your separation and certain legal matters pertaining to property. He will arrive within the fortnight. I pray you will receive him with the dignity befitting your former station." "Former station," Ezra repeated with dangerous quiet, "like you're some discharged soldier." "He's coming here," Clara said numbly. "Samuel's coming here." The brothers exchanged glances over her head. An entire conversation in that look. "He has no claim on you," Eli said firmly. "The divorce was final. But he kept everything. My inheritance. My mother's things. Everything except—" Clara's hand went to the small mirror she still carried. Her last link to her old life. "Then what does he want?" Ezra asked. Clara knew, with sick certainty, exactly what Samuel wanted. Word of her new life must have reached Cedar Falls. A woman living with two men, flouting every social convention. It was the kind of scandal that could damage even a respectable man's reputation by association. The next days passed intense preparation. They reinforced their legal claims to the land, organized papers proving the legitimate business they ran. But Clara knew paperwork wouldn't be Samuel's weapon of choice. He'd always preferred the cut of words, the subtle poison of insinuation. He arrived on a Tuesday, driving a hired buggy with the same rigid posture she remembered. 5 years had added gray to his temples and lines to his face, but his eyes remained cold as winter stone. "Clara," he said, stepping down from the buggy as if he owned the very ground. "You're looking weathered." "Samuel," she kept her voice neutral, aware of Eli and Ezra flanking her on the porch. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" His gaze traveled between the three of them, lips curving in an unpleasant smile. "When word reached Cedar Falls of your situation, I felt it my Christian duty to intervene." "There's nothing here requiring intervention," Ezra said flatly. Samuel ignored him, focusing on Clara. "You've fallen far, my dear. From a respectable wife to, what shall we call you now, housekeeper, or something less savory." "You'll watch your tongue," Eli warned, stepping forward. Or what? Samuel's smile widened. You'll defend her honor? What honor remains to defend? Clara placed a restraining hand on Eli's arm. What do you want, Samuel? Justice. You abandoned your marriage. You divorced me. Clara interrupted. Cast me out for the crime of being unable to bear children. A mutual decision. Samuel corrected smoothly. Or so I told everyone. Imagine my embarrassment when stories began circulating about my former wife's scandalous behavior. Living openly with 2 men, carrying on like some saloon woman. Get to the point, Ezra growled. Samuel produced a document from his coat. A complaint for alienation of affection and criminal conversation. Legal terms, my dear. For your adultery. I'm prepared to file this with the territorial court unless we can reach an understanding. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Such charges, even if ultimately dismissed, would destroy their reputation and business. No one would buy horses from them. No town would welcome them. You have no grounds, Eli said, but uncertainty colored his voice. Don't I? A woman who couldn't fulfill her wifely duties, suddenly living with 2 men, the implications are clear unless… Samuel paused for effect. Clara agrees to return with me to Cedar Falls as my wife. You divorced her, Ezra said through gritted teeth. A detail easily remedied. I've decided to forgive her barrenness. Take her back despite her failures. The townspeople will admire my Christian charity. And if I refuse, Clara asked, though she knew the answer, then I'll see you dragged through every court in the territory. Your lovers here will face charges too. Alienating a wife's affections is a serious matter. They could lose everything. Clara stared at the man she'd once promised to love and honor. He hadn't come for her. He'd come to save his own reputation, to transform from the man who'd abandoned a barren wife into the charitable soul who'd forgiven her sins. I need time to consider, she said quietly. You have until tomorrow noon. Samuel climbed back into his buggy. I'll be at the hotel in town. Come alone, Clara. We have much to discuss about your future. After he left, the silence stretched taut as fence wire. Clara sank onto the porch steps, head in her hands. We'll fight him, Eli said immediately. Get a lawyer. With what money? Clara laughed bitterly. Everything we have is tied up in the ranch, and he's right, the scandal alone could ruin us. Then we leave, Ezra suggested. Pack up, head further west where no one knows us. And the next time? And the time after that? Clara stood, pacing. We'll always be running, always looking over our shoulders. That night, she lay between them in the bed they'd finally acknowledged sharing, feeling their warmth but finding no comfort. Eli's hand rested over her heart. Ezra's arm curved protective around her waist, and she memorized the feeling. Don't, Ezra said into the darkness. Whatever you're thinking, don't. He'll destroy you both. Clara whispered. Everything you've built. We built it together, Eli corrected. It means nothing without you. But Clara had made her decision. Before dawn, she slipped from their arms, dressed in her best dress, the one she'd worn as Samuel's wife, and saddled Buttermilk one last time. The ride to town felt both endless and too short. She found Samuel taking breakfast in the hotel dining room, looking pleased with himself. I knew you'd see reason, he said, gesturing for her to sit. I'll come with you, Clara said without preamble. But I have conditions. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. I'll come willingly. Play the repentant wife. Make your story believable, or I'll fight you every step. Make such a scene that your reputation will never recover. Your choice. Samuel's eyes narrowed. What do you want? A signed document dropping all charges against Eli and Ezra McCall. No harassment, no future claims. They're to be left in peace. Done. What else? Time to put my affairs in order. 3 days. 1 day. 2. Clara countered. And you stay away from the ranch. I'll meet you here day after tomorrow, noon. Samuel considered, then nodded. Agreed. But if you're not here, I'll bring the law down on all of you. Clara rose without another word, leaving him to his victory breakfast. Outside, she nearly collided with Mrs. Morrison, who steadied her with surprising strength. "My dear," the older woman said, taking in Clara's pale face and trembling hands. "Come with me." Too numbed to protest, Clara found herself in Mrs. Morrison's parlor, a cup of strong tea pressed into her hands. "I heard Samuel Winslow was in town," Mrs. Morrison said without preamble. "Also heard why. Small towns have few secrets." "Then you know I have no choice," Clara said dully. "There's always a choice." The older woman leaned forward. "Do you know why I suggested you leave Cedar Falls all those months ago?" Clara shook her head. "Because I saw myself in you. 40 years ago, I was declared barren. My first husband set me aside for a younger woman who could give him sons. The shame nearly killed me. But you survived, remarried." "Yes, to a man who wanted a partner, not a broodmare. We built a good life together, even without children." Mrs. Morrison smiled sadly. "But I never forgot the injustice. When I saw it happening to you, I thought sending you away would spare you the worst of it. Instead, I found something worth fighting for," Clara said softly. "And now I'll lose it anyway." "Will you?" Mrs. Morrison stood, moving to her desk. "My husband is still the circuit judge, you know, and judges have considerable discretion in what cases they choose to hear." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "You'd help us?" "I'd help you. Those men of yours seem capable of helping themselves." She pulled out paper and began writing. "But you'll need to be brave. Stand before the court and tell your truth, all of it. Face down the gossips and the gnashing teeth. Can you do that?" Clara thought of Eli's gentle hands and Ezra's fierce protection, of the home they'd built and the love they'd found. "Yes. Then let's give Samuel Winslow the fight of his life." The courtroom was packed 2 days later when Clara entered, head high despite the whispers that followed her. Eli and Ezra sat in the front row, their presence a steady anchor. Samuel lounged at the plaintiff's table, confident in his coming victory. Judge Morrison called the court to order, his weathered face giving nothing away. "Mr. Winslow, you've brought serious charges. Present your case." Samuel stood, launching into a prepared speech about marriage sanctity and moral decline. He painted Clara as a fallen woman, himself as the wronged husband offering Christian forgiveness. "And what do you say to these charges, Mrs. Winslow?" the judge asked when Samuel finished. Clara stood on shaking legs. "I say that Samuel Winslow divorced me for being unable to bear children, cast me out with nothing but the clothes on my back. Now he seeks to drag me back not from love or duty, but to save his own reputation." "You don't deny living with 2 men?" Samuel interrupted. "I don't deny finding family where I least expected it, love where I thought none existed, a home where 3 broken people helped each other heal." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Judge Morrison banged his gavel for silence. "Continue, Mrs. Winslow." Clara looked at Eli and Ezra, drawing strength from their steady gazes. "I cook and clean and mend for them. Yes, but I also work the ranch, tend the horses, keep the books. We're partners in business and in life. If that makes me fallen, then I'll gladly fall again." "You admit to adultery," Samuel sputtered. "I admit to choosing love over convention, to building something real instead of maintaining a hollow pretense." Clara turned to face the packed courtroom. "How many of you have settled for less than you deserved? How many have stayed in marriages that were partnerships in name only?" She saw uncomfortable shifts, averted gazes, and pressed on. "I was told I was worthless because I couldn't bear children. These men told me I was valuable for who I am, not what I could produce. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty." "This is outrageous," Samuel began, but Judge Morrison silenced him with a look. "I've heard enough," the judge said. "Mr. Winslow, you divorced this woman legally and completely. You have no claim on her now, regardless of her living arrangements. Case dismissed." The gavel fell like thunder. Samuel shot to his feet, face purple with rage. But whatever he might have said was lost as Eli and Ezra reached Clara, enveloping her in an embrace that ignored all propriety. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, raising his voice above the din, any further harassment of Mrs. Winslow or the McCall brothers will be met with charges of malicious prosecution. Court is adjourned. They left through a gauntlet of stares, some hostile, some curious, a few unexpectedly sympathetic. Mrs. Morrison caught Clara's eye and nodded once, a queen acknowledging a warrior. The ride home was quiet, each lost in thought. As their valley came into view, Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. "It's over," she whispered. "No," Ezra corrected, pulling her close as they dismounted. "It's just beginning." That night, they celebrated quietly, aware that winning the legal battle didn't mean winning the war of public opinion. There would be those who'd never accept them, never buy their horses or share their table. "Let them talk," Eli said as they sat before their fire. "We know our truth." Clara looked around their home, the glass windows throwing back lamplight, the sturdy walls they'd raised together, the small touches that made it theirs. Tomorrow they'd face whatever came, but tonight they were simply three people who'd chosen each other against all odds. "No regrets?" Ezra asked, reading her thoughts as he so often did. "None," Clara said firmly. "Not one." Outside, the wind sang through the canyon, and somewhere in the distance, wolves called to their pack. Clara smiled, understanding the sound differently now. It wasn't loneliness, it was belonging, fierce and free and forever. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney like wishes. Clara made one of her own, for strength to face the coming storms, wisdom to navigate uncharted waters, and courage to keep choosing love over fear. In this wild land where conventional rules bent before the necessities of survival, they'd carved out their own small kingdom. Let the civilized world keep its narrow definitions and rigid expectations. Here in their hidden valley, love was simply love. Family was who you chose, and home was where broken hearts learned to beat whole again. "Forever?" Eli asked softly, taking her hand. "Forever," Clara confirmed, feeling Ezra's hand cover theirs. 3 hearts, 1 promise, and a future bright with possibility. It was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and let me know your thoughts on Clara, Eli, and Ezra's unconventional love story. What did you think of their journey? I'd love to hear your perspective.